Hello and welcome to the Athletic Hockey Show. I am Mark Lazerus with another edition of How to Fix. This is our summer series. We're checking in on 10 underachieving teams who are desperately trying to get their way back into playoff conversation. And today we're going to take a closer look at the Chicago Blackhawks. To do that, who better than my beat partner of a long time here, my Powers and Laz co-host, Scott Powers, the OG, the original hockey writer of The Athletic. Scott, how you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good. We're doing better than the Blackhawks are, as they have not made the playoffs since, I think, the prehistoric era. They had 72 points last season, finished last in the Central. That's becoming common. In the last four drafts, they've had the first, the second, the third, and the fourth round pick, or fourth overall pick. Obviously, they traded the fourth overall pick to Buffalo in the Bowen Byram trade. The last time they finished a season in playoff position was 2017, nearly a decade ago. They did make the expanded bubble playoffs in Edmonton, but even the Blackhawks themselves don't really count that as the playoffs. So it's been a long time. It's been a long rebuild. Technically, the rebuild started in 2022, but it's been a while now. Kyle Davidson just signed an extension, so apparently the Blackhawks think things are going great. But the city of Chicago is still waiting for an extension of a Blackhawks season. How far away do you feel this team is from really getting back into the conversation?
I don't know if it's fair to say, one, that the Blackhawks feel like it's going great. I think Danny Wirtz knows what the owner, signed up for, right? And this is for, as soon as the Blackhawks committed to Kyle Davidson's plan, that this is the way that it was going to go. It was going to take a long time. I don't think anyone understands how long. I don't know if Kyle Davidson knew. He's been very careful not to put a time frame on this. And the one time he did, he regretted that completely, and it went against him. So he's been very careful since then not to put a time frame on it. So I think it's Danny Wirtz understanding that he doubled down on Stan Bowman at one point and actually promoted him and gave him another title, and was really thinking that Stan Bowman's way was the right way. And obviously he was fired and left the Blackhawks for another reason, but it was headed in the wrong direction. Like, it was the Seth Jones trade on top of everything else and trading away prospects. And Kyle Davidson came in with this completely different plan, which was tearing it all down and really going through a full rebuild. And it's arguable that no team has ever done it to this extent, where they traded every single piece off. And we've been talking about this for the last 5 years, just nonstop, about where the pieces are and who's coming and who's going. And obviously there are more pieces in Chicago, from Connor Bedard on. So the fact that we're, here in July and Connor Bedard's injured and there's already that he's going to miss 10, 15 games, whatever, it puts the Blackhawks in a spot where next season isn't, I think it's fair to say, isn't going to be anywhere near probably what we even thought was possible. So, I honestly don't know. I mean, we'll get into a lot of details of what they've added and the players that are there, but I don't, I think every year there's been a lot of ifs, and the potential has grown slightly. Like if Frank Nazar works out and Roman Kantserov is what they think he is, and Bowen Byram, and we'll get into Byram stuff, but then maybe the Blackhawks are better, and certainly they were better in a lot of ways last year. If they win some of those overtime and shootout games, they're probably closer to an Anaheim and San Jose than their record indicates. So, there's certainly positives that they're had under Jeff Blashill. It's just whether they take that next step, because they removed some veterans. They've obviously added some risks. They've also added some unknowns. So it's I'm sure Blackhawks fans want to hear that it's all going to be better and it's improving, but it doesn't feel like this is it's one step after another. It's going to be a mixed bag here for a bit, and I feel like we've talked around circles for this for 5 years, and it's pretty much the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I know the Blackhawks fans don't want to hear this, but how to fix the Blackhawks might just be patient for a couple more years. There's a lot of talent. They were number one in Scott Wheeler's prospect pool rankings. There's a lot of good young talent on there that hasn't reached its potential yet. But they're just not there yet. I do think, and we've talked a little bit about this, there's finally at least a little bit of urgency. Like Kyle Davidson's been slow playing this for so long, saying just wait. And this past season at the trade deadline, when they, sold off Connor Murphy and Jason Dickinson and all these guys, Jeff Blashill was clearly not happy about it. Blashill, in his mind, he's not another placeholder coach. He's not another Luke Richardson or an Anders Sorensen. He's the guy that's going to take them to the next level. And his stated goal, and this was the player's stated goal too, was to not be in that same position at next year's trade deadline, to not be selling, to not be watching all your good players leave just because they're on expiring contracts next season. And Kyle Davidson finally felt a little bit of urgency where he was willing to trade a very valuable asset. We could talk about the cost management here, but the number 4 overall pick and Louis Crevier and a second-round pick to get Bowen Byram, who he sees as a number 1 defenseman. So clearly, there's a little bit of fire under them now to start pushing this in the right direction. But Bowen Byram alone is not going to make this team a playoff team. It's going to take the evolution of Frondell, of Kantserov, of Nazar, of Levshunov, of Korchinski, of all these young guys, Rinzel, to really get this team into a next, phase of the rebuild.
What's interesting about the Byram acquisition is that they're picturing him to be the type of player who sort of propels, and we talked early on when they drafted Bedard to have that their misstep was not having enough players to support Bedard, and as they've gone on here, have enough players to support a lot of these young players, and the early additions were Nick Foligno, and then they brought in Teuvo Teravainen and Tyler Bertuzzi, and it's certainly Bertuzzi's been a better player, but he's also kind of a complementary piece who has others help him, and Teravainen's been sort of on the decline of his career, and Foligno had his place, but it wasn't necessarily on the ice where he was helping him out, where all of a sudden Byram is the type of player where they feel like it's going to unlock a lot of things that they have been missing so far, and part of it is that it's the lack of, not development, but just the length of time it's taking Artyom Levshunov and Kevin Korchinski and Sam Rinzel, defensemen that they think have Bowen Byram upside, guys who can be number 1 defensemen, especially offensively. And now for them to have some urgency and to get a player like Byram, who they think one could be a piece of this for so long, but also sort of supplement and eventually maybe bring along some of those other defensemen. It's interesting where they've obviously it's a lot on Byram, but when you look at this roster, it's certainly Bedard in his 4th year, and he takes his, he's expected to take this massive step, and he's going to carry along Kantserov and Frondell, a lot of these players that he didn't have that sort of, teammates himself when he was coming up. But it feels like Byram, especially where they've lacked that offensive defenseman since they've started this. Connor Murphy was very solid, and Matt Grzelcyk was very solid. But Seth Jones didn't really work out in Chicago, was never, who they wanted him to be. And certainly Byram probably has a little bit more offensive upside than Jones in some ways, at least a little bit more dynamic. So it'll be interesting because I think so much is on Byram to unlock sort of how the Blackhawks play, and maybe how dictates somehow those younger defensemen they want them to play in the future.
Yeah, let's stay with the defense here. We'll get to the forwards in a moment, but right now you're looking at, you got Bowen Byram, Alex Vlasic, Wyatt Kaiser, Artyom Levshunov, Sam Rinzel, Ian Cole has been brought in as a veteran presence, and that's your top 6 probably. Kevin Korchinski, the number 7 pick in the 2022 draft, is probably your number 7. He's no longer waiver exempt, so they're certainly not going to put him on waivers, but they're probably not going to give up on him yet either. To sell on him now would be selling really low on a high upside asset. Ethan Del Mastro could be in that mix too, but he's more of like an injury replacement guy at this point. So I guess the question is, Byram, let's forget the contract. The contract doesn't really matter in Blackhawks world. The way the contracts are lining up, even when Connor Bedard gets his big extension, which might be like $15, $16, $17 million for all we know, it's not really going to be an issue that Bowen Byram is being paid $12.5 million. So let's move on past that. Who do you think is the best fit to be on that top pair? Because for a long time, it was supposed to be Levshunov and Rinzel fighting for that number 1 power play spot. Now it's who's the complementary piece on the number 1 pairing, and there's only 2 right-handed defensemen on the team right now.
Yeah, let's remind listeners too that we recorded this in July, so Connor Bedard's contract may have already been finished here, and there's a Patrick Kane of it all too, and we'll get to that. But these things may be done by the time we record, and there's only so much of a hockey off season for us writers to actually to leave, and so we're recording this early. But yeah, it's interesting. Ian Cole talked about he talked with the media after signing. He talked about how he's comfortable on his right side. And it might make sense to have a veteran who's played a lot of games and probably is not feeling the the pressure and all that goes with having forechecks and all that on you, and trying to do something different where you may want to allow Kaiser and Vlasic and Byram to play on their left side just to allow them any sort of more comfortability, and So I guess when I look at it on paper, Cole just might make sense just because he is the veteran in this group. He's the only player that's over 25 years old. He's had experience on the right side. Kaiser's played some right side. Byram said he's comfortable there. Vlasic has mainly played on that left side. So I think that's I think it's less about that. I'm more curious about who actually fits with whom, right? Like it's
Yeah.
we did an exercise after they sort of got done with most of their free agent signings and acquisitions about just trying to place it together. And we had to really kind of talk out who Byram fits with, who does Vlasic make sense with, where when you had Connor Murphy, and you had some of these other pieces, when you had more veteran pieces, it made more sense. Bowen Byram's his upside is his offensive game. Him naturally, there's probably not like a natural fit. Like if Levshunov is better and he's more consistent, then yeah, he can make sense. But he was so up and down last year, and he's not going to be 21 until near the start of this season. Rinzel's really young, and he's very offensive. Him and Byram, that might not work either too. And then you start talking about the left and right too. So there is some of that, but I don't know. I think that's one of the interesting things that are coming out of training camp, and maybe it's just mixing and matching and trying to figure out what works. But there aren't a lot of logical combinations. Maybe Vlasic and Cole, maybe if that's kind of your shutdown pair. But yeah, I'm curious how they sort of mix and match with Byram and some of these younger defensemen.
Yeah, you and I are in our Chicago bubble, and we're talking about these guys and seeing them all the time. And Chicago fans know about Levshunov and Rinzel, but to a wider audience, I think Levshunov is the interesting one because he was a number 2 overall pick. There are insanely high expectations that come with being a number 2 overall pick, and if we're going to quote unquote fix the Blackhawks, it's going to involve Artyom Levshunov reaching his potential. Now he's very young. I think he's 20 years old still. He's only had one full season in the NHL. He got benched a couple times last year for resets because he's this incredibly strong, gifted skater. He's got this great offensive mind. He's very creative. He's daring, but he does it at the risk. It's kind of like Bo Byram as early in his career, where he's a little too risky for his own good sometimes. Levshunov is really the key to this whole thing because Sam Rinzel could be a good power play quarterback, and Kevin Korchinski could, I think, at this point, be like a complementary piece. He could be a real guy, but Levshunov's the one who still has that really, really high ceiling. Jeff Blashill seems to be a believer in Levshunov. He loves the physicality, how strong, how big, and how tough he is. He's a big, strong kid, which you don't see. But I feel like people expect everyone to be Matthew Schaefer now. Artyom Levshunov is younger now than Cale Makar was when Cale Makar entered the league. So we can't overstate how young the Blackhawks defensive core is. Bowen Byram at 25 years old is like 4 or 5 years older than almost all these guys. So there's still a lot of room to grow. Where do you see the biggest, for a guy like Levshunov or even Rinzel, where can the biggest growth in their game happen that could make the Blackhawks a better team this year?
It's interesting because in a lot of ways, if Levshunov had stayed in college or Rinzel was just the pairing, I think there'd be less of the Blackhawks fans' concerns. Like if Levshunov had stayed at Michigan State or if they spent more time in Rockford, but these guys have been accelerated in a lot of ways where, and it's debatable whether it's worked or not. Certainly in Kevin Korchinski's case where he's brought up so quickly, from the WHL and he's taken some steps back and they've been really careful with Levshunov not sending him back to Rockford where they think he can grow in Chicago. And last season it really tested that. Certainly the Olympic break sort of came into play where they gave him a reset. And even Sam Rinzel, Rinzel, I'll get to your question, but Rinzel had spent those first 9 games of his NHL career after when he turned pro after, sophomore year at Minnesota, and he was dynamite, right? Like he was dynamic, and we were talking about this guy's maybe number 1 defenseman, and certainly, back to reality last season. But for Rinzel, I think Levshunov and Rinzel to me are in the same sort of same category, and they're both sort of in their same places in their career. Both have similar upsides, some in different ways. I think Rinzel needs to be more offensive. I think they sent him to Rockford last year because he was so inconsistent defensively. But Rinzel's bread and butter is that he needs to be pushing Byram even for the top power play time. I think he's the most creative defenseman they've drafted. I think his offensive upside and his size are just there's the potential is huge. I think Levshunov is offensive in a different way where he just thinks outside the box and he does a lot of interesting things with the puck and he often ends up in interesting places of the ice. So it's not coaching that out of him, because I think that's what makes him really unique, is that he is so aggressive, and but it's countering it with his size and his strength, and he needs to find a way to utilize that in the defensive zone. Like, he needs to be more of a two-way defense, and then probably Sam Rinzel needs to be probably more of a one-way, because I think you can hide Rinzel a little bit, where Levshunov, I think, on his size and his strength and all those different other attributes, that I think that his potential to be someone who can be on the PK and good in 5-on-5, and at the end of the game, like I look at the Blackhawks defense, and they don't have a lot. You got Vlasic, but who has some offensive limitations. I think Levshunov is the one who can grow into his game than more than everyone else, because of his, because of those things we talk about, those characteristics, where I think he can be the total package. So I think it's rounding out his game that he needs to be more consistent. He needs to be able to, there were games last year where he was just on the ice for 3 or 4 goals against, and a number of them were his fault, and it's just often being at the wrong place at the wrong time, and it's often to his own his freedom on the ice sometimes just works against them. So I think it's him having to find the boundaries of when I can be aggressive and when I need to pull back a little bit, and because I think certainly they've put down a huge ship here where Bowen Byram has to work out for them to succeed. But I think in the long haul, the way that they've drafted and certainly the resources they put into a second overall pick in Levshunov, that he's got to be a big piece of this rebuild as well.
All right, I think we've set a record for the least amount of Connor Bedard talk in the first 15 minutes of a podcast. So let's get into the forwards. Obviously, the Blackhawks got a devastating blow. Connor Bedard's going to miss the next 4 months, or I guess it's 3 months around the time this podcast is going up. Likely to miss the first about month and a half of the regular season. That's like 15, 20 games, depending on when he's able to come back. We're thinking like mid-November. And remember, the season starts in September 29th this year. It starts earlier. It's like all a confluence of bad things for the Blackhawks. So, it all started. This was the second lowest scoring team in the league last year, and taking Connor Bedard out for a quarter of the season, not going to fix the Blackhawks. So, we did a roster projection back in July, and this is what the forwards look like without Connor Bedard. What do you think? You got Frank Nazar at the number 1 center with Tyler Bertuzzi and Roman Kantserov. We're going to talk about Roman Kantserov. He's a big thing here. Anton Frondell, the number 3 pick a couple years ago with Donato and Lardis. Oliver Moore as the third line center with Teuvo Teravainen and Andrew Mangiapane, who was a throw-in in one of the Edmonton trades last year. And Ryan Green, who was Bedard's wing for most of last year, will be the 4th line center with new acquisitions Cole Smith and Jordan Greenway. Landon Slaggert, an extra guy. And when Bedard comes back in, maybe Andrew Mangiapane falls out of the lineup. He's not really a big piece for this team in the future. But without Bedard, like with Bedard in there, that top 6 is kind of exciting in a lot of ways. A lot of good young talent. But man, you take him out, and there's just a gaping hole of offense in that top 6.
It's really interesting to have this conversation, knowing that it's more of a national audience than our local local niche, because it's when you talk about Roman Kantserov and Anton Frondell, they're names that, if you're familiar with the draft, that or even prospect development, or other leagues, that you have some idea, but
they're big deals, yeah.
Big deals to an extent. But when you look at this lineup on paper, based on proven players and players that the casual NHL fan would know, it's the Blackhawks are, there were a lot of questions.
The analytics guys' projections of this team are going to be horrendous, because they don't account for development, really.
Yeah, no, for sure. So it's bank, and so it's certainly, if Kane comes to this, I mean, it sounds like Kane is deciding between Buffalo and Chicago. So if Kane comes to the Blackhawks again, it certainly changes what that lineup looks like. But without Kane, it's banking on Roman Kantserov, one who led the KHL in scoring last year, which he was the first under 21-year-old player or under 23 player to lead the KHL in scoring since Kaprizov. So the company there is pretty good, and he set records for I think under 23 points and goals. So it's certainly what he did in the KHL was impressive. It was a 2nd round pick, so there wasn't as much of a hype around him coming out of it. Certainly, he had played with Demidov in the MHL and some of that, but other guys were obviously more highly regarded. And then Anton Frondell, who he had scored the most goals in the SHL this past season as an under 19 player since I think the Sedins. So what they've done in other leagues is impressive, and the question is just how much that translates. And the Blackhawks, again, going back to our initial point, was Kyle Davidson's plan, and part of it was drafting these players, the Nick Lardis who led the OHL and with goals with, what was it, 70. I don't even know what the number was.
70, I think it was 71.
Yeah, so these are the guys who obviously haven't done it in the NHL, but the Blackhawks have drafted a ton of them, and a lot of them have done well in their leagues, in their junior leagues, in their pro leagues. It's a question of it translating and how quickly it's translating, and for the Blackhawks not to go out and acquire really any top six wingers the last few years. Certainly they added a few kind of complementary pieces, and they filled up some PK areas and some areas where they need a little bit more physicality, but largely didn't address the need for a Connor Bedard wing, didn't address probably some proven offense. They're banking on these young players to take that step, and certainly it's possible. It's rolling the dice a little bit. Maybe just a little bit, probably a lot. Like you're banking on Roman Kantserov probably to play a top line role.
He's going to be Connor Bedard's wing. They've basically all but etched him in stone.
Yeah, and even now, he's going to start off the first month plus of the season without Connor Bedard. So it's him transitioning to the NHL without Connor Bedard, who he can bring players along now. Like you even saw last year toward the end of the season where he's carrying, sort of Nick Lardis' development, and he's just so much further along in his own path that he is able to do that, at his age but he's 4 seasons in, and he's certainly elevated his game. It's just whether not having those players around, certainly it not ideal for Kantserov and Frondell's. Frondell's, this will be his first full NHL season too, where he got I think 12 games last season after he finished in Sweden. So that he got some experience, but first full NHL season, and Kantserov's first season, and even Nick Lardis spent time in Rockford last year. Oliver Moore spent time in Rockford. A lot of guys who the Blackhawks have projected in top 9 roles this year that don't have a ton of experience and are still trying to figure out. I think a lot of it does fall on Frank Nazar early on, who we've seen in stretches late 2 years ago. He was as good as anyone. The Blackhawks, the start of last season, we thought maybe Nazar, not Bedard, was going to be the one who was going to really take off, where Nazar's production was higher than Bedard's early on. And then he had some injuries and it just kind of fell apart. So we've seen Nazar has that capability. Whether he can put it up for an entire season is yet to be seen. But I think so much falls on him now without Bedard and just the unknown and just those players having to figure out the NHL early into next season.
Yeah, how to fix the Blackhawks? Keep Connor Bedard healthy, because this is the third major injury he's had. He broke his jaw in his rookie year, played all 82 games in his second year, suffered a shoulder injury last year that cost him about a month, and now this is his other shoulder, suffered during he took a weird, awkward fall and just training in Burnaby, British Columbia. He's had some bad luck, but he's also, I find myself almost like becoming a big homer on this show sometimes, like having to defend Connor Bedard, because so many people want the kid to fail just because he was shoved down their face for so long. I get it. I understand how that happens. His rookie year, his top winger was Philip Kurashev. His second year, his top winger was Ryan Donato. And last year, his top winger was Ryan Green. And then Andrei Burakovsky, who just fell off a cliff at the end of the second half of the year. And he's still, until he got hurt last year, for 2 solid months of the season, into mid-December, he wasn't just step for step with Macklin Celebrini. He was ahead of Celebrini production-wise. He was third in the league in scoring. He had taken that superstar leap. And when he came back, he couldn't take faceoffs because of the shoulder. There was a little bit of a problem. And then he had Burakovsky, just dead weight. He was dragging around for the last 37 games of the season. We know that Connor Bedard can be a superstar, and that's the quickest way for the Blackhawks to get relevant. But you're right. He needs help. And, Kyle Davidson's not giving him any help. Bowen Byram does play like a fourth winger. I get that. A fourth forward. So that'll help. It'll certainly help on the power play. But it really is. Nick Lardis needs to be that guy who was a 70-goal scorer again. Roman Kantserov needs to be everything the Blackhawks are desperately counting on him to be. Anton Frondell does not have the publicity of Porter Martone, because Martone did it in the playoffs, but they basically were putting up the same point-per-game numbers. But Frondell was very impressive when he came over from Sweden last year. If Oliver Moore can kind of be that depth scorer with his speed, that kind of do-it-all thing, there's a lot to like in this forward group. If they all take a big step forward this year, you can see this team becoming an 80, 85 point team, which is a huge leap forward from 72 points and then 56 points, whatever it was a couple of years ago. So there is a path, but we all know that, progress isn't linear, and not all these guys are going to take that leap at the same time. So
it's interesting because they've also if you put Frondell, and when Frondell came over from Sweden, we were like, well, there's Bedard's winger.
Yeah.
And then within a few weeks, they decided to put him at center. And it's been interesting how the Blackhawks haven't necessarily put in their most skilled players on the wing. They've wanted to go, like their dream is to have Bedard, Frondell, and Nazar down the middle. And even now, like
which makes sense. You look at the best teams in the league, Dallas and Vegas and Colorado. That's what they look like. They have centers like that. I understand the desire.
No,
but they really are.
It's just a matter they don't have the wings that are proven to do that. Like it feels like three of your best players on islands in a lot of ways, right? Like it's just they don't have the support. Where Ryan Green's fine, and he may become a good NHLer, but it felt like they forced some pieces to play with Bedard last year because they don't have the players around him. I mean, Burakovsky had this sweet role where he was coming off his struggles in Seattle, and he jumps in and he had a resurgence, and then he fell off. But it's been a lot of players from Foligno to Khrushchev to Donato to. I mean, Donato's been a solid player, but whether he's a top line player, certainly
Jeff Blashill clearly does not see him as
there's a lot of players that Bedard has played with that have been not necessarily of his caliber or guys like that. So I think Lardis and Kantserov had the potential. At least their ceilings seem larger than a lot of players. It's just how quickly they can get there, or if they can get there. They're just so young and inexperienced at this point.
Yeah, and the rest of the lineup. I mean, Kyle Davidson did not really improve the forward group this offseason. He, Cole Smith is going to basically replace Ilya Mikheyev, who was kind of a jack of all trades, really important piece for them. What's his name? Jordan Greenway is going to replace Nick Foligno as kind of your tough guy in the bottom six. And they still haven't figured out who's going to be the new Jason Dickinson, who might have been the second most important player on the team after Connor Bedard. Who's going to be your shutdown guy? Can Oliver Moore be that? Can Anton Frondell kind of take on a role like that as a two-way center? There's still a lot of question marks. They have too many forwards and not enough forwards. You and I were talking about this last week. They have a lot of guys, but they don't necessarily have the right pieces to create a fully realized, fully fleshed out lineup.
So what if Patrick Kane signs? What does that change? What do you think about this lineup?
Well, then you have Kane with Kantserov and Bedard, and you can use Lardis on that second pairing. You can bump everyone down a little bit. And, then all of a sudden, Ryan Donato's in a bottom six role. He can play a little more defensively. Andrew Mangiapane doesn't have to be on this roster. And, guys like Sasha Boisvert can get more time marinating in Rockford. I think Kane stretches the lineup significantly because this is what we're talking about with, they're forcing Bedard to play with lesser wings so that they can artificially stretch out the lineup. They're stepping on the product, They're trying to dilute it. And if you give Bedard a real wing to play with, and that's what Kane would play, and that would be the appeal for Kane. It was, if he goes to Buffalo, and again, we're recording this in July, I understand, so this might be old news, but in Buffalo, he's going to have a better chance to win. In Chicago, he's going to have a much bigger role. So if that's what he wants, he would be a top six guy without any question in Chicago, and it would really allow the rest of the lineup to kind of lock into place, because we've been talking for 3 years, where is Connor Bedard's winger? Kantserov and Bedard come in, and Kane come in, all of a sudden you have a top line. And I think that's the key here is you need another scorer. You need Ryan Green to become the defensive player, the defensive forward he needs to be in the bottom six. Oliver Moore to be that kind of jack of all trades Swiss Army knife guy. And I think you stretch out the lineup, you get rid of a guy like Andrew Mangiapane. Landon Slaggert, nice player, doesn't finish, probably doesn't belong in the NHL right now. He's kind of a tweener. You add one more really good forward to this group, and I think things start to click into place.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I think Kane at 5-on-5, you've seen more of a decline in his game than you have on the power play, where he's still really good. I certainly think Kane adds to this group, and I do think there'll be some questions of whether Kantserov, Bedard, Kane, whether that's
small.
Yeah, like if that's what they want, but there's some other pieces they can play around with too. I think Bertuzzi, there's a little bit more. If you have creators around Bertuzzi, maybe Bertuzzi all of a sudden starts to fit somewhere else, and certainly you can mix and match a little bit. But having, I think Kane would it changes what that group looks like, and some more of the possibilities. So
at goalie, they're pretty much set. Spencer Knight's your number one goalie. He's a true number one goalie. He was 6th in the league last year and goals saved above expected. Played a lot of games. He's going to play even more this year without the compressed schedule. Arvid Soderblom is in the last year of his contract. He is kind of a perfectly cromulent backup. He's not very good, but he's not very bad, though he's had some stretches. Drew Commesso, a second round pick a few years back, is kind of knocking on the door. He made a couple of spot starts last year in emergency situations due to illness and performed pretty well. It's not inconceivable that Commesso can win a backup job in training camp, but it seems like it's more likely that comes next season, not this coming season.
Yeah, I don't think it happens in camp. They're gonna, especially with only 4 preseason games, and I mean, Commesso has been good in Rockford. He's had good stretches. He's also had rough stretches. Soderblom actually has had better seasons in Rockford than Commesso has. I think Commesso is really interesting. Of course, wherever they drafted him, he is entering fourth pro season. He's also had those games in the NHL, and we've seen goalies who come up who've looked really good and aren't necessarily good goalies, and then other goalies who've struggled in a few games. And Commesso, when he's come up, he's played really well, and I think that's added a little bit to his resume and people's intrigue about him. I don't know if he's that goalie. I think he's just really interesting in that. It's sort of his pedigree and where they drafted him, and they've had high hopes for him. He spent a lot of time in Rockford. I would guess that he gets more time in Rockford, and then ultimately Soderblom's play and health and all that stuff kind of comes into play. But that'll be one of the more intriguing things to watch this season, is whether someone unseats him. But Spencer Knight is such a definitive number one at this 1.2.
So where do we think the Blackhawks stack up in the Central Division here? I mean, they were 10 points behind Winnipeg in last place last year, essentially 72 points. The Central's loaded. Colorado's not going anywhere. Dallas is not going anywhere. Minnesota's only getting better. Utah's only getting better. St. Louis and Nashville are kind of meh. Winnipeg could be on the decline, especially if they trade Connor Hellebuck. Maybe the Blackhawks can pass Winnipeg if they go into full teardown mode here. But, I mean, there's zero. I mean, we're supposed to be addressing their playoff chances here. There's virtually no chance this team makes the playoffs. It's hard to see them taking an Anaheim-type leap like this coming season, especially with Bedard missing such a big chunk of the season early on. What's a successful season in your mind for these Blackhawks?
Well, I think the ceiling is a wild card. Like you're in contention for a wild card, right? Like I think that if you're playing meaningful,
better win some overtime games. You better go San Jose.
For sure.
Here.
Like they need to be better. Like they need that. I think there is an expectation within the team from Blashill and I think once Bedard gets back, I think Bedard, especially whatever his contract number is, going to be really large, and his commitment to the team. We'll see if it's again the unknown of what he's going to sign for here, but he's in it to win too. So I think his expectations of where this team is, and it'll put a little bit more pressure on the Blackhawks. I do think what's really interesting about from the trade deadline, even throughout the season, is Blackhawks have 3 first round picks that they can move at some point. So I think they're not going to move it for rentals, but maybe there's something that comes into play late in the season as some teams sort of figure out where they're actually headed, where everyone thinks they're contenders at this point. But maybe the Blackhawks improve as the season goes on, or late in the season they add someone that they see who's sticking around for longer. I think that could be really intriguing. But yeah, I think the hope for the Blackhawks and their fans has to be that they're playing meaningful games late in the season. Like it's been so long since the games have really mattered from February on, or even before that at times. I mean, I think that's if they're winning some more overtime games and shootout games, I think the record improves gradually, and it's not that far of a separation between them and sort of Anaheim and San Jose. Obviously Anaheim made the playoffs. San Jose was on the cusp, but I think record wise and regulation wins weren't that much of a difference. So I think that has to be it. Like they need to see the growth from within. They need to see Kantserov and Frondell be sort of what they're hoping to be. They don't need to be obviously 40 goal scorers this year, but they need to show the capability that eventually they can be the type of the wingers they can rely on to be Bedard's line mates or just somewhere in the top 6. And then I think there's so much on Bowen Byram and the Blackhawks where they've his contract will get trumped here at some point soon with all the other defensemen who are up, but they're paying him like a number 1 defenseman. He's never been a number 1 defenseman. I think a lot of it's going to come down to production. Like he has some defensive deficiencies, and some of that's just the reality. But the Blackhawks brought him in to put up points with Bedard, put up power play points. So I think a lot of that they need Bowen Byram to look like what they traded for him, and then what they paid him. So I think those are the main things. And then just to be better, I think the Blackhawks fans could live with a little bit longer rebuild if all those things are starting to really show that they're moving in the right direction. Otherwise, I do think if Byram's a disaster and it's not working out, or if Kantserov and Frondell just aren't, showing that capability, then I think there's some larger questions that'll start being asked.
Yeah, basically all the hope is in Kyle Davidson's player evaluation here, right? If Byram becomes the number one defenseman that Davidson expects him to be, and if Kantserov becomes the top line winger that Davidson expects him to be, and if Frondell becomes the great two-way center that Davidson expects him to be, and if Nick Lardis becomes a goal scorer like Davidson expects him to be, then the Blackhawks are going to be pretty good for a pretty long time. So, I mean, you're really putting your faith. Danny Wirtz has put his faith in Kyle Davidson, and Blackhawks fans have no choice but to also, because all these moves are made, and there's not much flexibility. There's no savior coming in through that door. So, it should be an interesting season. They were pretty competitive early last year before Bedard's injury. So, there is talent there. There's an exciting young team in here waiting to happen. Can they be the next San Jose or Anaheim? That's the hope. So, we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, thanks for doing this, Scott. We'll keep an eye on everything you're working on, obviously. And I talk to you more than I talk to my wife, I think. So we'll be in touch. And thanks also to producer Jeff and to everyone who watched and listened to this episode of the Athletic Hockey Show. Sean McIndoe and Julian McKenzie are going to try to fix the Ottawa Senators on our next episode on Wednesday. Good luck with that. And we'll see you next time on the Athletic Hockey Show.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell to stay informed and catch new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And in the meantime, you can join our Discord community. We'll see you there.